Yes, Andrew. From the back even. That's a rare one, isn't it, eh? Okay. We needed it. Yeah, we're nearly there. Okay.
Good evening all, good evening to the public, and welcome to Oakengates and the extraordinary meeting of Telford Wrekin Council. I can pass you over to the Speaker who will start proceedings. Thank you.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is, as the Mayor has said, this is a extraordinary general meeting. The rules of the Council are normally there, but these means that we're tighter on the rules tonight than we normally would be. What I intend to do is to tell you that filming is allowed, recording is allowed, and you will be going out to the wider world, this debate will. Can I ask you all to switch off your mobile phones if you've got them? There's nothing worse than a mobile phone going off in the middle of somebody speaking. And that includes the councillors. Can you turn your phones off, please? Can I ask you all to be quiet while people are speaking, because we do need to hear what's being said. It's an extremely grave subject, and I will be allowing one or two speakers a little extra time because of the gravity of the subject we're talking about. And I will indicate when they've got a couple of minutes extra than the normal 2 or 3 minutes we allow. Okay, we'll start and move on from there then. Item 1 on the agenda is the apologies for absence.
Councillors Liz Clare, Sean Davis, Nathan England, Rob Sloan and Barry Tillotson.
Are there any other apologies from the floor? No? Councillor Sean Davis is off ill. He was taken ill over the weekend. That is why he's not there. But he's, as is the leader, he'll make a statement via Lee Carter when the time comes to make it. Item 2, any declarations of interest?
None received, Speaker.
Right. We need now move to item 3, and this is the motion moved by Andrew Eade. Andrew, do you want to move your motion, please? Yeah, take you some water first.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Speaker. Speaker, I'm grateful that at long last it seems that all councillors have accepted the need for an inquiry into ongoing and historical instances of CSE in our borough. It has been a long and painfully slow journey since our first call for an inquiry back in September 2016. It has been an 18 months of wasted time and opportunity in which this council has completely let down families, victims and survivors alike. It has been a failure to understand, a failure to listen, a failure to believe, and a failure to act. It is a failure which has brought into disrepute this administration's core values, and in case you've forgotten what they are, let me remind you. Openness and honesty. You said, and I quote, "We will be open and honest in the way we work." with regards to your core values of fairness and respect, you claimed that you would respond to people's needs in a fair and consistent way and wanted everyone to respect and care for themselves and others. On ownership, you stated that you would be accountable for your own actions and you would like everyone to take action and responsibility for themselves in their community. On involvement, you claimed that you would work together with our communities, involving people in decisions that affect their lives and be prepared to listen and take on new ideas. These were to be your guiding principles, but I asked the question, what happened to them? And when did you decide to ditch them along the way? To say that your core values are now tarnished and lie in tatters is probably an understatement. It does this council's administration no good whatsoever. However, even at this late stage, I would have hoped, and I do hope, that we have an opportunity to do the right thing and unite this divided council between a single but decisive action. But before we vote on our motion, all members must firstly understand what this motion is seeking to achieve and why it has been brought forward in this rather unconventional way. Although the position of the current council leader with regard to an inquiry has U-turned from initially denying victims any sort of inquiry to eventually hiding behind the skirts of Professor Jay's national inquiry, the effect of this is duplicitous and allows the leader of the council to claim on one hand that he now supports an inquiry while throwing it into the long grass with the other. So let me be quite clear about what this council's administration is proposing. The Truth Commission, which will arrive at Telford in the coming months, is not a formal inquiry in any shape or form and will simply gather accounts from victims and survivors to feed into the National J Inquiry. The National J Inquiry, for its part, will only investigate child sexual exploitation in institutions such as children's homes, hospitals and schools, etc., and may not arrive in Telford or report for several years. That is, if it decides to investigate Telford at all. This administration knows this to be true only too well, and I believe every councillor here tonight is also very aware that this is the case. It is tantamount to a complete failure to act and is at best burying one's head in the sand. However, at worst, it is deliberately setting out to deceive and to delay justice and closure for past victims, survivors and their families. Just as damning, this administration is also turning its back on any instances of CSE that are being perpetrated today. Let me remind you, we all have a duty as both elected representatives of our community and as corporate parents. I have to say that I completely fail to understand why this council has continued to resist such a local independent inquiry. The issue of ordering a local inquiry must not be one of cost, despite the council deliberately misleading our community by stating that such an inquiry would cost millions of pounds. The cost to Rotherham was £123,000 and it reported very quickly within 9 months. Such an inquiry would also help form the terms of reference for any future inquiry which would follow. The current administration must now accept responsibility and culpability for failing to commission such an inquiry when first pressed by my group back in September 2016. With this in mind, I want this council to do the right, proper and decent thing and immediately put in place a local independent inquiry which will investigate past and present circumstances around CSE in the borough. We must guarantee victims and survivors alike the ability to give their evidence and experiences in private, and both with respect and decency. This will, of course, also include reviewing the actions of the Conservative administration between 2007 and 2011, when the groundbreaking Operation Chalice was instigated. It will also give us the opportunity to assess and understand the nature and scale of CSE within the borough, something which I believe we totally lack at the present time. Now, consequently, Speaker, I'd like to move an alteration to our original motion as tabled. And it's the middle paragraph, which will now read, "This meeting also requests the Cabinet to instruct council officers to commission such an inquiry immediately." Now that's deleting the words "as soon as practically possible." Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Does the seconder agree to that alteration?
Yes.
Does the meeting agree to the alteration? Do you want to second it now, please?
Yes, I second the motion and reserve my right to speak later, just to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Carter. Now, I'm going to give Councillor Carter, Lee Carter, a few extra minutes because he's got a statement from the leader who I said has been taken ill over the weekend. And I think it's right and proper at this situation that he has a few extra minutes to make that statement. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As you state, I've been asked to pass on the apologies of the leader. He has received medical advice this weekend to cease all activity as a result of a recurring illness. I can say that he's desperately sorry to have to miss this very important meeting this evening, and he's asked me to make the following statement on his behalf. As parents, grandparents, uncles, aunties, godparents, as members and representatives of the Telford and Wrekin community, we all have always wanted to get to the bottom of the issues that have been raised, some dating back 30 or 40 years. The Labour group and I, going back years, have always wanted the National Independent Inquiry into child sexual exploitation or a government inquiry with statutory powers. We have always felt that was the best means of providing the fullest answers to the victims and survivors. However, we have to put our reservations to one side in order to accelerate the process of uniting our borough and giving the victims and survivors the answers that they want. The Truth Project begins its work this month. It's vital that we as a council unite to give victims and survivors and their families the confidence to attend and tell their story. We have been told by the National Inquiry that they will make a decision as to whether a further inquiry is required into each of the partner agencies at the end of this process. However, the work to plan for a council inquiry has already started. We've already put aside initial funding and we've agreed to appoint an independent expert to begin to scope out any future council inquiry. I want to work cross-party to ensure that the process of appointment of this independent person has the confidence not only of us all, but most importantly of the victims, survivors, their families and the community. And the Cabinet paper next week will set out how we think this can be achieved. In terms of today's services, we have continually increased the resources into the safeguarding of the most vulnerable in our borough and into tackling child sexual exploitation. The services have been reviewed by Ofsted, which categorically state the team is very strong. The Home Office and Department of Education have also praised the team, as has the J Inquiry too. We have commissioned the specialist NWG to review current services, and they will be reporting back shortly. Our Kate team are amazing public servants, and we should be proud of them. Tonight is more than about uniting around a motion. It is also about uniting around a course of action. Now, Mr Speaker, I'd just like to continue with a few words of my own, if I could, as part of this debate. Thank you for letting the public speak this evening as well. I too welcome this motion tonight, as it will once and for all nail the myth that anyone elected to represent the people of Telford and Wrekin in this room has ever been against an inquiry. The leader, as I've just read out, has set out our intentions and additional actions we've taken to deal with this issue in the round. It's also important to note that as a matter of course, we have also allocated more officer time to support communities who are now facing on a daily basis some of the unintended consequences of the stories we have seen published in recent weeks. And so really, this is now about tonight. From minute one of taking control of this council in 2011, we immediately reinstated the role of Director of Children's Services, right up until today, and a commitment into the future. Each and every Labour councillor has and will always be committed to actions, not gestures. On Monday, a report will be published for Cabinet, setting out how we will set in train a cross-party process which will go about the business of setting the course for a council-commissioned independent inquiry. Next Thursday, the 19th, 7 working days from tomorrow, the Cabinet will meet to discuss and approve that report. Speaker, the Telford public want calm, level-headed, honest leadership through this. Calm, level-headed, honest leadership from this Labour administration is what the Telford public will get. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. I did ask you to listen to the speakers and let them speak. Can you do that, please? But just listen to what's being said. At the end of the meeting, afterwards, I'm going to call in the MP to say a few words, and also then may have 1 or 2 members of the public if they want to make a statement. So can we be quiet till then, please? Councillor Peter Scott. Oh, sorry, Bill Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my view, the best way forward now has to be with a show of unity in supporting the victims and survivors of child sex exploitation and abuse. They cannot even begin to heal whilst we argue over which type of inquiry to hold or who said what and when. There is an overwhelming desire locally to start a local independent inquiry as soon as possible, and after communicating with a number of victims, I believe that must happen. The J inquiry can pick up on anything we miss or are unable to deal with in the future, but that should not stop us from doing something now. And I call on both Shropshire MPs and all the leaders of all 3 groups to put aside party politics and openly join forces to make an inquiry happen at the soonest opportunity. My own research into this subject has proven to me that there are young people out there who cannot even start to heal until their cases are fully explored and they are listened to. We owe them our deepest respect, attention and consideration. But let us also put a stop to the goading and sniping on social media and specifically on Twitter. It serves no useful purpose other than to foster feelings of hate and distrust, which does not help one single victim. The recent Telford 10 poster is an example how these things get out of control. 10 honourable men have received hate mail and even death threats from those who are driven by others with a political agenda, many whom don't even live in our borough. And anyone who gleefully retweeted that poster should take a long look at themselves and what they hope to achieve by doing it. The subject of child sex exploitation must also not be used as an election tool. Telford and Wrekin do not have elections until May 2019, and there can be no progress while the current arguments and bickering continue. There must be no more showboating by anyone. The opportunities to really work together must start tonight. So let's not continue to attack each other. Let's draw a line and pledge to work together. And I'm going to finish with a direct quote from a victim to me that touched me deeply. It still does. Please show your support not only to the non-recent victims and survivors, but also to the current young people and their families who still walk each step with fear, shame and loneliness because of CSE. I support this motion.
Councillor Bill Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I shall try and keep it short because I'm sure that members of the public I've only been made aware will be able to speak tonight. Don't want to sit the rest of the night listening to 3 political parties or political groupings chat away for hours on end, where the most important people who should be speaking tonight are the victims and their representatives. My esteemed colleague here has stolen most of my thunder, Mr. Speaker, but I'd just like to say a few words. I want to echo particular sentiments that he said. We've got elections coming up in just over a year's time, and I would like all members of this council to set aside political objectives, politicise scoring and trying to who's going to get the most seats and then trying to lash back at everybody else. This subject is just too important for that. I was concerned about initially our own council putting forward an independent inquiry for all the reasons that have been laid out before, which is particularly its strength, its inability to go back certain times, which people are probably fully aware of now. But my colleague and myself have heard and listened to what victims have said, and it's something that they desperately want. And I think there are times when we can sit here in our offices thinking that we know best, where maybe people out there really are going to drive us to where we ought to be, and that's the way democracy is. So I fully support this motion. Thank you.
Angela McClements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I spoke at Cabinet on the 29th of March, I said that when growing up as a teenager in Alston in my town of Wellington in the 1970s, no one understood about child sexual exploitation or was equipped to deal with it then. That was 40 plus years ago, when it was Shropshire County Council who were running children's services. It was happening way back then, and sadly, it's still happening now. The voices of victims and survivors, both past and present, must be heard, and I will therefore be supporting this motion tonight for a council independent inquiry to be carried out. It's crucial that the Truth Project, which is part of the National Inquiry team, also feeds into any inquiry, and I would urge anyone who is a victim or survivor of child exploitation in Telford to come forward and speak in confidence to a member of the Truth Project. I think it's really important to clarify again this evening that this Labour administration has always supported the need for an independent inquiry. Unfortunately, this has been misrepresented and misconstrued by some and serves no useful purpose except to cause anger and confusion. Whilst I support this motion, I still have concerns about this inquiry that will not give all the victims the answers they deserve, especially for those cases going back 30, 40 plus years. Someone I know is a survivor who was in that position, Mr. Speaker. Her story goes back way beyond 1998. Will her voice be heard under a council inquiry? And I think it's really important that we bear this in mind when considering whether a council inquiry will answer all the questions that all victims want and deserve. We must also be aware that a council independent inquiry could not compel, demand, have the powers to call in, say, Shropshire Council, police, GP services, schools and other agencies. And under a council independent inquiry, anyone giving evidence wouldn't give evidence under oath. That said, I believe that a council inquiry, even with its more limited powers, is better than no inquiry. And I am delighted that we have begun the process to plan for a council inquiry, which will include the appointment of an independent expert. And I'm pleased also that the leader will be writing to all group members next week to set out how this will happen. Following on from this meeting, in 4 working days, a detailed report will be published to go to the next Cabinet meeting, setting out a cross-party way forward for a council independent inquiry. And I do want to take this opportunity of thanking our fantastic Kate team for the great work they are currently doing with victims and survivors at CSE. You know, it can't be easy for them at the moment. And as a number of members have said, you know, in concluding, I just can't tell you how important it is that we all work together collectively on this issue and ensure that we get the best outcome possible for all victims and survivors. And I hope that from tonight's meeting, that will happen as we all unite around this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Nicola Lowry. Now, before Nicola gets on her feet, I'm going to allow Nicola a few extra minutes because she wants to read a statement out from some survivors of this thing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as part of this motion, I feel it is vital to remember why we are all here, and most importantly, ensure that the voices of our survivors are heard. I have been asked to read out a collective statement from and for survivors, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting me the extra time this evening. We stand proud today as a group of survivors survivors of some of the most violent and disturbing child sexual abuse you can imagine. We have suffered being beaten, raped, sexually assaulted, manipulated, blackmailed and threatened. Some of the young girls who have suffered this abuse aren't here today to be able to stand tall with us, but their families also want the answers we are all so desperate for. We want answers to questions that should never have had to be asked. Why was this allowed to happen? Why weren't reports to social services and the police acted on? Why were we blamed and belittled by the people who were paid to keep us safe? Listen to parents' concerns. Why were those concerns not acted on? Who made the decisions not to act and why? We all honestly believe that there is still an air of misunderstanding when it comes to child sexual exploitation. We are aware that since all the negative publicity, there have been adults who have been worried about the safety and the well-being of their families. Imagine that same feeling as a child, holding all that fear inside, feeling responsible for the safety of your family, and the only way you can protect them is to comply with being raped, sold, humiliated, stripped, and forced to give multiple men oral sex whilst other men watch and laugh at the tears rolling down your cheeks. Being urinated on, slapped and spat at like you are a piece of dirt. Some of us fed drugs or alcohol, which creates an addiction, because it's the only way we can forget, feeling like there's no other option but to die. Imagine then having to go home to your family, who are at the end of their tether, with you behaving so erratically, but still you hold it all together. All that pressure, and you're just a kid. The emotional effects this has can and have been catastrophic. We don't trust, we struggle to maintain relationships and friendships. Some of us have even lost our own children due to a lack of support, and only offered ridicule and blame for struggling with day-to-day life. Most of us have nightmares, which keep us up night after night, making us feel unsafe in our own homes. Depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, loneliness and detachment are all things that are a result of CSE. Very few of us have had to learn how to manage these emotions, learnt how to function to a degree that means we can love a semi-full life. But the fact that we are all still being ignored by those that should be listening leads us to believe there is either an element of blame or a total lack of understanding about CSE locally. We deserve answers. Our families deserve answers. Answers that the National Inquiry is going to take years to deliver, and by rejecting or delaying the process for an independent inquiry in Telford, the victims, survivors and their families are living their lives in traumatic limbo. Being triggered off and left feeling like what they have suffered isn't important enough for Telford and Wrekin Council to take seriously, leaving us feeling we are not respected for finding the courage to speak out and say what we want to happen. We understand that most people are planning to vote for a local inquiry, which we are all incredibly happy about. But we need to be realistic, and the Council needs to agree that any local independent inquiry needs to be commissioned as soon as possible. And not wait. While we wait, there are going to be more young girls who are being groomed, raped, more families being destroyed and torn apart as a result. This inquiry needs to start now and investigate prior to 98 to present day. Things need to change, and we want to be part of that change, which is why the Holly Project is being set up to be run by survivors of CSE for victims, survivors and their families. Survivors are the experts, and we intend to help and support anyone who has had their lives affected by CSE in Telford. Like their J report, a council-commissioned inquiry can call from people across organisations to give evidence, and anyone who refuses will have some serious questions to answer. We all support the Truth Project. Some of us have already given evidence in other parts of the country in relation to the abuse we have suffered here in Telford, but we all agree that the national inquiry isn't going to give the outcomes, the speed, or the scrutiny that Telford needs. Do not sell us short. An independent inquiry needs to be commissioned now. Mr. Speaker, Telford and Wrekin arguably has never faced an issue of this magnitude. Therefore, as mentioned tonight, I hope we can all stand united to commission an independent inquiry immediately to ensure public confidence is restored and justice is fought for our brave survivors. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Councillor Paul Watling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support this motion because, as Councillor McClement has already stated, a council-commissioned inquiry is better than no inquiry at all. But we must be honest with victims and survivors and ensure they're aware of the limitations of any inquiry we commission. Can I start by saying that one victim of child sexual exploitation in the borough is one too many. We must listen to the victims and survivors of this vile and evil crime and continue to do everything we can to prevent this happening and do all we can to tackle and charge the perpetrators. Those victims want their voices heard and rightly want answers. We must continue to learn from them to help partners to further improve our practice. Only a government-commissioned inquiry will be able to do this. We're pleased that Professor Jay has decided to bring the vital work with victims as part of the National Expert Independent Inquiry's Truth Project, which begins its work in Telford next month. It has the skills and the resources to do this, and to do this as quickly as possible. Sadly, I cannot be here tonight and say that child sexual exploitation is not happening. It's happening here, just as it's happening in every town and city across the UK. We all need to talk about it. We all need to take action and share what we see and hear to protect our children and help prosecute the evil perpetrators. Many victims don't realise what's happening to them or see themselves as actual victims. The perpetrators of the abuse are often clever and manipulative. Child sexual exploitation is everyone's business. We all need to look out for our children, to look out for the signs and tell someone. I appreciate this will be no consolation to victims, but we're tackling this issue. We are making progress. Last year, we invested a further 180,000 into our Kate team. Partners are currently working with 46 young people of both sexes who are at risk of child sexual exploitation to help prevent them becoming the victims of this crime. Last year, our Kate team worked with 68 young people aged between 13 and 18 to prevent exactly this. The police's dedicated child sexual exploitation team since 2016 has arrested 56 people in Telford, resulting in 29 charges, with a number of these investigations still ongoing. Partners are working with young people, schools, youth groups, hotels, pubs, clubs and taxi drivers to ensure their staff recognise the signs of child sexual exploitation and to report this so that the police can act. Councillor Carter has already outlined why a council-led inquiry would not give victims and public the answers they rightly want, but has said a council-commissioned inquiry is better than no inquiry at all. I support.
Thank you, Councillor Watling. Councillor Veronica Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This motion is about all the children and young people, known and unknown, who have undergone such traumatic experience through CSE that they need help and healing, in particular our help. They have not been believed. An independent inquiry will give them a voice to be heard in private and security, that they will be heard and their experience be acted upon. It takes great courage to speak out, and they want this made known for us to fully understand what they have suffered. They were drawn into a life under a false sense of security by stealth. They are defiled, their childhood lost for the perpetrator's gratification and financial gain. How do any of us fully understand this and know how one person or more have power over another? Power, dominance, control, abuse, physically and sexually abuse, sold on, isolation, humiliation, living in fear, threats to themselves and their families. They need to tell their stories in confidence, which will help the healing process as well. But much more is needed for that. An independent inquiry now will help us deliver this for them. Many people are saying this. Amongst many media broadcasts, on the 13th of March 2018, BBC Radio 4 Women's Hour held a 14.5-minute interview. Presenter Jean Garvey with Lucy Allen MP and Catherine Hallesley, Senior Solicitor of the Child Abuse Team for both Bindon and Kemp solicitors, and a harrowing account of the experience from Holly. Lucy conveyed that when a young person makes a complaint, they are not always understood by the police of what is going on and may not be reported as CSE. BBC that day discovered the National Inquiry, the J Inquiry, is not taking on new cases. Telford is not included. Lucy also conveyed that National Inquiry can get bogged down. That is why an independent local inquiry is necessary. Their voices must be heard. Catherine Hallesley agreed, following on from what Lucy had said. This really does need an independent inquiry. Their voices need to be heard. Jane Garvey asked, after all that has been said and done, and all the publicity, nothing seems to be happening. Is there still a problem? And Kathleen revealed it is still happening. The recommendations from the Rotherham report are not trickling down to Telford. We owe this independent inquiry now for all our children and young people. To do otherwise would be to abrogate our duty of care and due diligence towards them. It is happening now in many forms. This very moment, 13-year-olds are being groomed via the media, by social media. We do not want to have a public inquiry on the national level because this would not give us all that we need for our present people at the moment. We need to challenge what has happened and get answers from all in authority, partners and whoever is involved. I commend that we agree to this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Janice Jones.
Janice Jones, Maidley Ward, Telford. I would like to make it clear that I wholeheartedly support this motion, as I would support an investigation into these monstrous crimes, and let there be no doubt that these are monstrous crimes. However, I have to say that I feel that this does not go far enough, and we should at some point follow up with a national investigation. In order to do any justice for the victims of such atrocities, we need to do an in-depth, totally independent investigation at some point in the future. Believe me, limitations to any inquiry will not get all the answers that we are looking for. I work very closely with victims of CSE, and the issue is very close to my heart. With a lot of help and the support, the victims can, in time, move on, but will never truly get over the tragic experiences. I am wondering at this point how the Kate team are feeling. They have worked so hard over the past few years in order to safeguard our children and young people by promoting their welfare and taking swift action when dealing with perpetrators. This team is committed to swift action. This team is committed to gaining the trust of victims, engaging professionals such as police, safeguarding, education, social workers, in order to deal with their valid concerns. Thus, whenever possible, keeping our children and young people safe from sexual exploitation. I often attend safeguarding training and meetings outside of the borough of Telford and Wrekin, and believe you me, people from other areas are singing our praises. For the Kate team, I, for one, would like to think that the recent coverage has not disempowered the Kate team in any way. Let me be clear, at this point, there will always be room for improvement, and we must never let ourselves be complacent about such important issues. I welcome a national inquiry, the Truth Project, as the victims and survivors will get their chance to talk openly about their experiences and to have their voices heard. It is vital that both victims and survivors come and tell their story. They have told us that they want their voices heard, and this will be key towards clearing up the transparency of this investigation. We have always said that we want an independent inquiry into child exploitation in Telford. This is so important because victims and survivors need to have their voices heard, and rightly they want the answers. But to get these answers, it must be the right inquiry eventually. We all in this chamber know the Council Commissioned Inquiry would have much more limited powers and scope, as has already been mentioned, and cannot possibly give the victims the answers that they rightly want. Child sexual exploitation is reported to go back 40 years. This particular council has not existed for 40 years. We have to date only scratched the surface of this major problem within our society, and the buck does not stop at any particular culture or set of beliefs. The children of today are our future of our humanity, and we must not leave any stone unturned when it comes to protecting them.
Thank you, Janice. Councillor Miles Hoskins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a councillor and a corporate parent, I represent 170,000 Telford citizens who are being undoubtedly let down by authority for their failure to allow full access to the truth about child molestation of all kinds. We must investigate such abhorrent crimes, both historical in nature as well as those of current times. Those councillors of long standing will tell you of the horrid rumours relating to such problems in the past. There has been a scale of failure by all agencies. Our young people have been abused, and now is the time to examine such failure in depth. Things must change. Our duty is to defend in every way any victims and collating information sympathetically and ultimately bringing those responsible to account. The knowledge of police officers, care workers, church leaders, teachers, NHS staff, any key professionals should be catalogued, collated and acted upon as a matter of urgency. Telford will never rise above criticism if it fails to have all party and multi-agency support. Those who are feeling uncomfortable with the thought of an independent inquiry by this council should take into consideration their position in society and retire. For many years I was an active special constable and know of the problems that the police force had in collating evidence. Now is the time to revisit all agency knowledge. The perpetrators are varied, and we know that cultural differences exist, but irrespective of the race, creed, colour or social standing, such people must answer for their actions. We must eliminate this insidious behaviour from our society. Now is the time to face reality and come up with solutions. We are all collectively culpable. Telford's name is blackened. Our people deserve to be defended. Our young people must be protected. They deserve better of a caring council. Hang your heads in shame if you do not support this independent inquiry. We, as custodians of a growing 21st century city in the making, must stand up for the values that we hold dear and vote for an independent examination of all factors. Hang your heads in shame if you do not support this independent inquiry, because when you leave this building tonight, if you fail to agree with this motion, you stand down and allow others with more moral and principled ability to locally govern.
Can we listen to the debate quietly, please, and not try and interrupt? Councillor Jane Pinter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Let Councillor Pinter make her statement, please.
Thank you, Councillor Speaker. Mr. Speaker, child sexual exploitation is an evil and despicable act. I was a member on the committee, the scrutiny committee, which commissioned a review into CSE. This was completed in 2016. This was the most comprehensive and largest scrutiny review ever taken on by Telford and Wrekin Council.
0 prosecutions. Have 7.
It was
Please be quiet. Let's have the debate properly.
As a result of this review, we made 38 recommendations, all of which were agreed by Cabinet. Part of that review was speaking to victims and survivors to understand the traumatic and despicable events that had happened. What I found positive with the review was that all parties from all political persuasions were strongly in agreement with the recommendations and the outcome of the review. We know it's still going on, but at least we are talking about it, and we now have strategies in place which we didn't have before. For instance, in 2012, we asked the local Safeguarding Children's Board to commission an independent review of our practices in tackling CSE. The report was published in 2014. We have also implemented any further recommendations from the Rotherham inquiry which weren't already in place here. In 2017, we were visited by the Home Office and Department for Education, and in March this year, the Home Office confirmed that they were satisfied that Telford and Wrekin is not a council in denial over the issue of CSE. Last month, we specifically requested that a national expert independent inquiry led by Professor Jay come to Telford to conduct a Telford-specific inquiry, and I am pleased that the Truth Project is now in place, which will give victims and survivors an opportunity to tell their story, and I would encourage people that are affected by this evil crime to come forward. Thank you.
Councillor Tim Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to talk about transparency, which has already been mentioned by a member opposite, and free speech. Before I do, 2 small pieces of housekeeping. The point about Twitter was perhaps well made, but we're not all on Twitter. More seriously, I've got a blue tie on, but this is not about party. This has never been about party. This is about the truth, one that understood. Members, the residents don't expect much of local government, fortunately. They pretty much expect the school places filled and the bins emptied. There are a couple more things they do expect. They expect in this free democracy that the dealings of their local council are faultlessly transparent, a pane of glass. And they expect their representatives, that's us, to speak openly on their behalf without fear or favour. They don't expect their representatives to be gagged. Over a year ago, the member opposite accused me, and by extension, all of us, that even raising the subject of CSE would put off young victims coming forward. I have read you the statistics before. In 2017, over 300 contacts to this council with CSE marker, concerning over 200 young people. Not one bit put off. Outrageous to try and curb pre-speech then, and proved wrong to boot. But what do we find? This administration are still at it. Will they not learn? I quote Councillor Davis, who's not here but is still, I assume, leader. I quote from my local paper only last week. Any talk of an independent inquiry at this time runs the risk that victims and survivors will be uncertain who to speak to. Any talk, tripe. We don't answer to you, Councillor Davis, we answer to the residents. I ask the administration, learn this lesson. I admit, I do not understand why the administration have been trying to block an immediate, local and independent inquiry into the premeditated and organised predation of young girls in this borough. There must be a reason. It escapes me. It escapes the residents. We must hold up a mirror voluntarily of our own making to the dealings of this council. We must do it now. Members, this is your chance. Prove your council is transparent. Exercise your right and duty of free speech. Stand up for the residents, parents, victims. Support an immediate, local and independent inquiry. In fact, demand it. Thank you.
Councillor Shirley Reynolds. Before Shirley starts, I've got another half dozen speakers who have indicated want to speak, as including the seconder who's reserved his right to reply and the right to reply from the mover. I don't intend to take any more speakers except what's on the list that already indicated. Councillor Shirley Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to recognise that this evening we have survivors of child sexual exploitation with us in this room. Therefore, my comments are directed to you here tonight. After all, justice for the victims and survivors is what unites this town. Our country and your voices must be heard, and the perpetrators of this evil crime must be brought to justice. I'm a little concerned that I've heard many dissenting comments from the opposition tonight on this when we are united on this motion. There is nobody in this room who has spoken against this motion. My role focuses on giving our children the best education in the best schools with the best teachers. I want to reassure you tonight that this council is putting the safety of our children first and foremost in any decision that we make. We have a role to play as educators of our children. Our schools play a vital role in educating children of the dangers of grooming, social media and unhealthy relationships. I've worked in education for over 20 years. We know, as parents in this room know, that our children are shaped by their education. We all have a responsibility for that education. School is where they spend most of their childhood. It's exactly the place, and it's where we can identify signs of child sexual exploitation and tackle them. This is my priority as a mother in Telford and as a councillor representing you. In respect to this motion, we need a process that gives a voice to all victims and the authority to leave no stone unturned and no truth left untold. We know that the National Independent Inquiry has the teeth to compel witnesses, other agencies, and the power to go back beyond 1998, something that is imperative if historical abuse and institutional failings dating back 40 years are to be investigated. A local inquiry also has its part to play and an opportunity And importantly, a council inquiry is definitely better than no inquiry. But we need to encourage the national inquiry to conduct a full, transparent and systemic inquiry. We are committed to protecting the most vulnerable and ensuring voices of the victims and survivors are heard. We want to ensure that there is help and support available to victims and survivors, and we urge those that are able and want to come forward and to have their voices heard via the Truth Project, and to use the support of many agencies available to them. We will open ourselves and our practices to inspection by anybody at any time. I therefore support the motion.
Shirley. Councillor Stephen Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, firstly, may I say that I welcome the positivity that I'm hearing tonight in the room about this independent inquiry. But let's remember, it's 2 years too late. It should have happened in 2016 when this motion was initially put. It quite clearly could have happened last week at the Cabinet meeting, where the leader didn't, despite opposition giving evidence in that and speaking very clearly on this, he could have come forward and he could have given us the steer last week, as I say, at the Cabinet meeting. That didn't happen. What we're seeing now, because of the papers and everything else, is a complete U-turn. And that is unfortunate. I don't like to see this town degraded in the way it is in the national media. I don't like to be associated with what I'm reading. But what I do want to see is victims coming forward and getting the support that they deserve over many years. It would appear we are going to get the inquiry. Whether it has limitations or whether it doesn't, let's make sure that that inquiry does help the victims.
Councillor Kevin Guy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to start by saying I fully support the motion and the pending arrival of the Truth Project in Telford. I will definitely be giving evidence of my personal experience in talking to survivors and their families in the upcoming Telford Will Be Heard Truth Project. I will, as I hope every other person in Telford and Wrekin, be supporting their fully independent and expert review, which I hope leads to a national independent inquiry. I will share the detailed findings of the year-long cross-party scrutiny review that I chaired into how well today departments and organisations share crucial data with regards to child safety. This internal review was followed, as we all know, by a 1 month-long investigation by an 11-strong Ofsted inspection team, which after a deep and detailed investigation, in their own words, found that the services in Telford were strong with regards to CSE and currently signpost other councils to Telford and Wrekin for good practice. Mr. Speaker, I have and continue to support the current work by Professor Jay and a national inquiry to CSE and have fed the council's scrutiny findings to her. I fully support her expert independent professional inquiry in coming to Telford and hopefully to conduct a Telford-specific inquiry, and I strongly encourage all the people in Telford to support that in however way they can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Councillor Andy Burford. Oh. Thank you, Andy. You're on the list. Councillor Dugmore, do you want to? Sorry, Joy, I've got you at the top of the list. Councillor Joy Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past 40 years or so, I've spent my time raising my 4 children and looking after other people's. My passion in life to keep children safe and happy. Like most people, bobbing along in my own little bubble, fighting my own little battles, not being aware of what was going on in the wider community regarding other people's children.
Are you blind?
I was shocked when I read about Operation Chalice in the local paper and all that it entailed. And then a couple of weeks ago, I picked up a paper and saw a dear sweet girl smiling out at me. And I realised one of my sons had gone to the same primary school with her 25 years ago.
Can you use the microphone, please?
Thank you. Is that better? What is it with some men, not all men, and this goes across all cultures, that they hang on to this medieval belief that they own us? Well, they don't. I believe we even have the vote now, ladies. They can't buy us or sell us anymore, or our services. It's illegal. It's a crime. How has this been allowed to happen to our children? Through ignorance, turning a blind eye, or fear, or a mixture of all, I suspect. So let us, in this golden year of Telford, bring to justice the criminals and justice for the children. So, ladies across the floor, will you stand with me tonight? Will you stand with our sisters out there? Use your power, use your vote, and give these children what they deserve, an immediate independent inquiry. Thank you.
Councillor Overton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We must be clear in supporting this motion tonight that no one has never said there shouldn't be an inquiry into CSE. There may have been alternative arguments as to what type and who does it, etc. But we've always recognised that this issue is of paramount importance to our residents. We all have children who want to grow up in our town without fear, as parents, uncles, aunts, grandparents, and as corporate parents. What we have to do is make sure what we are doing is the right way forward for victims and survivors, as they are paramount in this. We sometimes forget it is what they feel and what they want to see from the support required or the outcomes of any inquiry. I would reiterate, the Council and its partners encourage anyone having experience of child sexual exploitation, either as a victim, survivor, or as a parent, guardian or friend, that they speak of their experience of the Truth Project. There are also other organisations offering support with Axis, branches and Time for Change. Some of the stories we have heard in the national media seem to be historic in their nature, predating this administration and even predating the Borough Council. Some of the issues identified in the media talk about GP practices and other agencies around at the time having intelligence that this type of crime was occurring. Clearly to make sure that those people, those agencies, those with that type of knowledge can be made to come forward and to give their evidence requires an inquiry with teeth, one that has a wider remit than one we could commission ourselves. But as our leader said on the radio the other day, any inquiry is better than no inquiry. So we must do everything we can to make sure that no stone is left unturned as we seek to find out the answers. But we must be mindful that the Minister for Local Government in a letter, Rishi Sunak MP, said such a review would need to avoid having a negative impact on the work to protect children locally that the Council is already undertaking. It would also need to recognise and not duplicate the important work that the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse is doing. The Council is the acknowledged expert on the local area and has a convener role with partners. It is best placed to judge exactly what benefits a new Council Commission inquiry would bring. We all need to understand the failures of the past. We have to. We really have to. So this type of abuse doesn't happen again. And let's be clear, it is not just a Telford issue, so any learning from it must be shared, as with the Rotherham inquiry. All those recommendations in Rotherham are already being done here in Telford. We need a robust, independent inquiry that will seek to find the failures of the past, to support those who are survivors or victims of this terrible crime. And as I said as I started, we must never forget it is the victims and the survivors who this must be about. They need to feel what comes out of any inquiry is right and just, and can help them in moving forward and heal. And that together we close the failures of the past. And with our partner agencies, we do everything we can to stop this type of crime occurring in Telford and Wrekin.
Thank you, Councillor Overton. Councillor Dugmore, do you wish to speak or not? Oh, sorry, Councillor Greenaway. Oh, Councillor Carter, I never saw you indicating previous. I did say a few minutes ago I'm closing the list.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you hear that? Yeah.
I'll hear the lady, Councillor Greenaway.
Thank you. I'm also a member of Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. I was part of the working group reviewing the multi-agency working against child sexual exploitation in 2016. We underwent training, read all inquiry reports from J&KC, interviewed a wide range of people from service providers to victims. The terms of reference were looking at what improvements had been made to services since Operation Chalice and what we had learned from Professor Jay's inquiry. But you can only judge by what you have heard or information seen. Again, we have seen reports in the national press of serious allegations, witness interviews and documents highlighting the situation historically and currently in Telford and Wrekin. Some of this information was not made available to members to allow us to make decisions based for recommendations. Now, in 2016, report of scrutiny, it said, despite the success of Operation Chalice, it is clear that CSE is still taking place, although the true scale of the crime is unknown. We were told that the activity of people suspected of involvement in CSE was blatant. And in 2016, a request for an inquiry was rejected by this council. We know from the review that only half of respondents to our victims and parents surveys contact local services. We know that only 1 in 8 victims come to the attention of the statutory organisations, and this is supported by the Children's Commissioner report. We have little knowledge of victims from ethnic communities and even less about boys affected. We do not have a clear understanding of the scale of the crime, and as figures show, child sexual offences and lesser crimes in statistics. We know that child sexual exploitation takes many forms and are all life-changing for victims. Evidence suggests that where child sexual exploitation is prevalent in an area, it is associated to serious organised crime, drugs and criminal exploitation for financial gain. However distasteful it may be to talk about this, we must. In Telford, the children were being used as a commodity, transported and sold. They did not give consent. They were manipulated and groomed. This is not just sexual abuse, but raped repeatedly, multiple times, and used in horrific ways. This is the reality of what happened to them. Victims need to know they will be supported and believed. Survivors want answers and closure. We should serve the community we're elected to represent, not to act defensively when asked difficult questions, not to doubt reports or to discount credible information as gossip and hearsay. This is our time to right the wrongs which have affected our children. It is irrelevant what we think should happen. The decision is ours, but the only people that matter are victims, survivors and families who've endured this nightmare for far too long and continue to live with the consequences with little or no support. They deserve better. We need to do our job that we were elected to do and ensure that an independent inquiry is commissioned with immediate effect to find some answers. For that reason, I support this motion.
Councillor Dugmore, do you wish to speak? It's all right. Councillor Dugmore, I select the speakers. Do you want to speak or not?
Of course I do.
Well,
Mr. Speaker, astonishingly, we've heard tonight that the Labour group are united in supporting a local independent inquiry. However, some senior members of the Labour group were part of the so-called Telford 10 who wrote to the Home Office saying that such an inquiry is not necessary. I
Can you please be quiet? I did ask you at the very start of the meeting to listen to the views in silence. We do have opposing views. So can you please be quiet, or we're coming to the end of the debate now, so can you please listen to the end in quietness? Sorry to Councillor Dugmore.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm pleased that you guys have seen sense at last. Mr. Speaker, I second the motion, though it gives me no great pleasure that we are in such a position that makes it necessary. Indeed, if action had been taken 18 months ago, when I and my colleagues first demanded an inquiry, in all probability we would be discussing its recommendations now. Yet here we are in the same position after nearly 2 years of dither, delay and denial. How many more victims? How many more shattered lives? How many more families destroyed? No one knows, which is why we need action now. Mr. Speaker, I and many here tonight cannot comprehend why there has been such reluctance to commission a local inquiry. The administration seems to be dazzled by the headlights of recent publicity. We are repeatedly assured that local child protection services are good and the lessons learned following Operation Chalice have been adopted. But only an immediate inquiry would reassure the public, restore the reputation of the town, and most importantly, give victims the answers they rightly deserve. Delaying an inquiry after the Truth Project visits and reports will mean a further delay until 2020 for any answers, and the J inquiry won't report for 10 years or more. How many more victims? How many more shattered lives? How many more families destroyed? Mr. Speaker, our hearts go out to the victims, and we all hope that they will have the courage to come forward, get help, and to bring the perpetrators of these vile crimes to justice. Yet there seems to be reluctance from some victims to come forward. We need to know why. If there is a perception that victims are ignored, we need to know why. I would like to publicly thank Holly Archer and others for their bravery and tenacity in coming forward. And helping to encourage other victims to follow her lead. You truly are an inspiration. It's no small part that the online petition of almost 50,000 signatures has brought us to this point, where I hope that we will have unanimous support for our motion and that tomorrow this council will start work on locally commissioned independent inquiry into CSE. As elected members and corporate parents, we have a duty to the public and the children of the borough. We mustn't fail them. I second the motion.
Councillor Carter, Eric, that is, and then Andrew Eade to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I don't intend to do is repeat and go on into the detail that some of my colleagues earlier have said. They've spoke eloquently, and I fully agree and endorse what they've said. Why I wanted to speak tonight was that I happen to have a very close friend who is a member of Rotherham Council. And I was in conversation with him a week ago, and what came across to me were several words that he said, which I do not want to hear repeated here this evening. And these words were complacency, ignorance, lack of action, and cover-up. That's what happened. That's what happened in Rotherham. We must not allow it to happen here. Previous excuses will not count. It's what this council does. It's what these people deserve and what we must make sure happens. Let's not go into detail about what we've said in the past or what people say they haven't said. We're here now to debate this motion. We really need to make sure it has the effect that we want it to. And this, I presume, is across this council. We have to make sure that the people out there, and let's be looking at the people who were standing outside this gate when we walked in, people out there need to be listened to and need to be dealt with in a fair way. We cannot let any more young victims down. We've let them down in the past. We can't let them down in the future. What I say to everybody is support this motion and let's get on with it.
Councillor Reid to reply to the debate? Well, there's been nobody against it, Andrew.
Well, that has come as a bit of a shock, to be quite honest. As you might have guessed from what's been said on this side, we came here expecting a fight, and a real fight, to try and force this motion through. So we did get an independent and local inquiry. However, I have to say, I really welcome the change of heart right across the floor in all groups, because that's what it's been. And it has been a fight to bring it to this point. And if it took this meeting to actually achieve that and get this sort of motion passed so we can get a local inquiry underway, so be it. And we'll make no apologies for that whatsoever. However, this is not about councillors, or for that matter, the need for decisive and considered political leadership, although I have to say that really has been lacking on this. Neither is this about the media or personal agendas. This is about providing a safe and caring borough where our children can grow and prosper. It's about providing a safe environment for all members of our community to come forward with their concerns in absolute confidence and without personal risk or retribution. And that certainly applies to whistleblowers. It's also about providing the right resources and support for council staff and other agencies who have to deal with these issues day in and day out. And it's about the community supporting the police to deal with CSE properly and firmly in Telford and Wrekin without fear or favour. Our victims deserve that sort of support right across the board. But most of all, it is very much about giving a voice and some sort of closure and dignity to victims, survivors and respective families. They really deserve our support. And I have to say, as an elected member, that has taken far, far too long to materialise. As I say, I first called for an inquiry back in September 2016. We're here to represent our wider community and to do what is right and proper on their behalf, and also what's right and proper on our behalf as well. Now it's up to members to search their conscience and make the immediate step of putting in place an independent local inquiry on a cross-party basis. Only that will send out a clear message that we're determined as an authority, as a community, to fight this awful and heinous crime in the borough. And we've sent out a clear message that we will not tolerate this action anymore. Now, I do urge members to support this motion, but even so, even though it appears that there is a majority of support across the floor, I'm still somewhat in denial on that, on what has been happening and what has been said by elected members on social media and in various meetings over a long period of time. But if that's what it takes, and that's what it's taken to get to this point, then great. At last we're going to see some sort of justice, as I say, for victims. And I would like to move a recorded vote.
Yeah, a recorded vote it is. Thank you. I won't read it, Jonathan.
Councillor Ashford. Councillor Barnes. Councillor Bentley. Councillor Blundell. Councillor Boylan. Councillor Burford. Councillor Burrell. Councillor Eric Carter. Councillor Lee Carter. Councillor Cook. Councillor Doug Moore. Councillor Reid. Councillor England. Councillor Evans. Councillor Ian Fletcher. Councillor Veronica Fletcher. Councillor Francis. Councillor Furnival. Councillor Greenaway. Councillor Guy. Councillor Hoskin. Councillor Jones. Councillor Kiernan. Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Loveridge. Councillor Lowery. Councillor Mason. Councillor McClements. Councillor Mehta. Councillor Meredith. Councillor Minor. Councillor Murray. Councillor Nelson. Councillor Overton. Councillor Pinter. Councillor Gilly Reynolds. Councillor Shirley Reynolds. Councillor Steve Reynolds. Councillor Rhodes. Councillor Sahota. Councillor Scott. Councillor Seymour. Councillor Charles Smith.
For.
Councillor Malcolm Smith. Councillor Karen Tomlinson. Councillor Bill Tomlinson. Councillor Turley. Councillor Watling. Councillor Wright. It's unanimous.
That is unanimous. It's passed with... Right. Can I now move to the next part of the meeting and ask the MP, Member of Parliament for Telford, Lucy Allen, to come down the front and make an address.
I'd like to speak this way, if I may. I'm really delighted that we've just sat through a really important debate and that there has been unanimity across the board for this motion. That means we're now going to get an independent inquiry, locally led, locally focused, independent, which is going to give people the answers they deserve. And I would like to thank all the members here tonight who have voted for this motion, and I congratulate you all for doing that. But I particularly congratulate the members that brought this motion forward, that fought so hard to have this meeting, and for the excellent speeches that they gave. And I particularly want to thank Nicola Lowry for her really moving testimony. And I know she was representing a survivor who has suffered, because let's make no doubt about any of this. There are people in our community who have suffered. There are people here tonight who have not had justice. There are people here who are too afraid to come forward and have their voices heard. And that's why tonight was such an important event, and that's why it's so gratifying that everybody has turned out tonight to support this motion, and that all the councillors have come together and unified to bring this forward. It matters for our community so that we can heal. Now, I used to be a councillor many years ago, 10 plus years ago, and on the wall of our council chamber there was a plaque, and the plaque said, "We serve." That meant we serve the people. We must never forget that. We serve the people. We are not here to do the bidding of the Home Office officials. We're not here to do the bidding of the officers of this council. We are here to listen to the people of Telford, to hear what they have to say, and to act. And that is what has happened here tonight. And that now means we can move forward. And I am so pleased that we've achieved that. There are two people who made this happen specifically, and I want to mention them by name. We have a tenacious investigative journalist who came up against an awful lot of dismissive comments from many people in authority, who brushed her aside and said she made it up on the back of a fag packet, who dismissed her in the same way as they dismissed many victims. And that is a problem. They dismissed people like me who spoke about this in 2016. People said I was racist to be raising the issue at all. That is wrong. That is all part of trying to silence us. We must not be silent, because what message does that send to the victims? It tells them they have something to be ashamed of, and they do not. None of you have anything to be ashamed of. And alongside the investigative journalist, there was Holly Archer, an incredibly articulate, intelligent woman. I've never come across somebody with so much insight and so much calm when she must be experiencing so much anger. But she didn't let her anger get in the way, because she had a mission. And tonight, she has achieved that mission. And I would like us all to stand and congratulate Holly Archer. This is just the beginning. There is a lot of work to do, and I think we all recognise there is a lot of work to do. But we cannot pretend, and tonight I have heard people pretending. I have heard repeatedly people saying that they have always called for an investigation. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that isn't true because there is a letter that exists that people in this room signed saying that no such investigation was necessary. Now, I wanted to strike a conciliatory note because we are all going to have to work together. We are all going to have to move forward together, both with the police, with the council and other agencies. But we cannot pretend. So I wanted just to make that point. I don't do it to be political. I don't do it to antagonise. But I just want the truth to be out there. So going forward, yes, let's work with the council. The council is united. Let's work with the officers. Let's work with the police. And I think there are some serious questions for the police to answer. I think it's very important that they participate voluntarily in this whole process. And I believe that they will. Because we do know, not only is it still going on, but we do know that their response is not what it should be to victims who are coming forward now.
We are told, white slash this, white slash that in my communities. The attitudes of my communities need to change. This wasn't just rape, it was racially aggravated rape, racism to the highest, and it's still happening.
Now I understand.
Only because they were white girls, and this is not just racism, it is attributed into the Islamic ideology to which I have turned away from, and many thousands of others have turned away from.
So I'd just like to address a point that you have made there. There is a lot of anger in our community, and I do believe that this will be an opportunity to let some of that anger go, because we don't want to be angry going forward. We want to be a united community, and it is absolutely important that people have the opportunity to say it how it is. So I thank you for raising that point. I would like to see attitudes change. We've heard, and it's probably...
We have to change our attitudes, that's the point.
Yep.
Attitudes,
so
my communities need to be addressed and exposed. Because if the racist attitudes in my community are not exposed and spoken about, we are not going to move forward. Because every time these people bring that up, they are called racist.
I agree completely. It's unhelpful to call anyone a racist for talking about CSE, because we must all feel free to talk about CSE without being silenced by the term racist. You are right to raise that point. The other issue on attitudes that I want to raise is the attitudes towards women and girls. Because we have seen, and there is no doubt about it, the same way that the investigative journalist was treated, the same way that I was treated when this was raised, and others. The victims are predominantly, and there's no doubt about that, young women and girls. And the attitudes towards them by the authorities must now change. And that is something that I am going to continue to fight for. But I want to end on a positive note. You've all come here tonight to hear democracy in action. We have seen the local people who are here to serve you come up with a solution. And the solution that they have come up with is that we will now have an independent local investigation that will be led by somebody entirely independent of the authorities that we've been talking about today. That is so important. And please feed into that investigation. Please feed into the Truth Project as well, all victims. And I want to be absolutely sure all voices are heard. So thank you very much. Thank you, councillors, very much, all of you on all sides, for coming together and uniting. Please let's continue that in a spirit of community, because we want our community to heal. We're proud of our community, and we want the victims to be proud of themselves for coming forward, and they should be. We all owe them a debt of gratitude for their bravery, and thank you again for being here tonight.
Thank you, Lucy. That's gave people some food for thought. Can I ask the members of the public to make certain that any of the remarks that they want to make are given to the independent inquiry and to the Truth Commission, which is coming to the town? We need all those remarks feeding in properly. And if you'll do that, that will help the inquiry go and get the right answers to what we want. So can I now adjourn the meeting for 15 minutes while we get to the other part, so the press and the others can clear, and the television people can get ready. So we adjourn the meeting for 15 minutes for the second part. Thank you all for attending. Meeting. This is from the adjourned meeting on the 1st of March. We'll start it properly. Mr. Mayor, please.
Right, okay. Welcome all members. Right, if I pass you over to the Speaker, we can start proceedings.
Item 1 is the apologies for absence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have apologies from Councillors Liz Clare, Sean Davis, Nathan England, Rob Sloan and Barry Tillotson.
Okay, any more from the floor? Anybody left after the last week meeting? Right. I know there's one or two giving press interviews, but we'll carry on. Kevin Guy's had to disappear. So it's an apology. Any declaration of interest in this part of the performance? Yes, Councillor Burrell.
Interest in both motions due to my membership of the Health Overview Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you. Anybody else? Annie Burford? Hilda Rhodes. Anybody else? I'm on about a declaration of interest, Councillor Bentley.
Well, yeah, I'm doing that as well.
Yeah. Right. Item 3 then is recommendations from Cabinet. This is driving delivery of the Council's priorities. You, Ray.
Council, this report presents a refreshed Council plan which sets out our community priorities and what we want to achieve against each of these. And yes, it also sets out how we will deliver through our values, continuing to be the core of this plan. We have already made over £110 million worth of savings and more to come. We've also seen demand on our services increase. This plan therefore also describes how the organisation will continue to change in order to have the resources it will need in the future. As well as the new Council plan, this report gives an overview of the progress we've made against our community priorities in the last financial year. We continue to build our strong reputation as a place to do business and secure inward investment and job growth. The £72 million investment from Magna Castings was one of the largest, most recent foreign investments into the UK and will create 300 high-tech jobs. However, our real challenge is to ensure that the benefit of this growth is seen across all our communities, particularly the young. We need to make sure that the borough's workforce has the skills required. Key to this is improving educational attainment. Across all key measures, the borough is on par with or better than the national average. But not all schools are achieving these levels, and we will work with these and challenge these schools to improve. With regards to homelessness, although overall the number of cases in our borough is relatively small, we remain very concerned about the impact of changes to the qualification criteria for housing benefit and the lack of appropriate housing to meet this need. Through our £45 million+ worth of Pride in Our Community programme, we are investing to improve our local environment, roads, footpaths and street lighting. The report shows the impact of this. But this programme is not just about the big projects. Just as importantly, it's about the small things and the positive things that make a difference to residents' everyday lives. The Council plan and the performance information contained in this report show that we are a council working hard to make a positive difference to residents' lives, and we continue to strive to achieve more with less. We recognise that there will always be work to do and services to improve. To stand still is to go backwards in business. So as a learning organisation, we will seek to find ways to improve, something we must and will do to ensure that we are able to deliver our vision of a borough that is a great place to live, learn, work and do business. Mr. Speaker, I therefore recommend that the Council Plan 2018-19 to 2020 is approved and the in-year performance against the Council's priorities is considered and noted.
Thank you. Is a seconder for that motion? Councillor Overton, do you wish to speak? Councillor Ian Fletcher or Veronica? Find out amongst yourselves who is first. Councillor Veronica Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer to page 2, our priorities, 4.1.4. Protect and support our most vulnerable children and adults, put our children and young people first, and improve the health and well-being of our communities and address health inequalities. I then refer to improve the health and well-being of our communities and address health inequalities, 4.2.32 and 4.237. And there is an omission. There is no mention of the newly launched BU Emotional Health and Wellbeing Service of tracking and outcomes. This is vital because it is a developing service. This is also vital because CAMS remains a key piece of work with main challenges around lack of capacity. So I ask, why is it not in the report? This is a priority for the mental health of children and adolescents and their well-being. Further, their access to a consultant for assessment and further help and treatment is woeful. There is only one consultant for the whole of Shropshire. Last Tuesday on BBC Midlands Today News reported and showed the protest march by parents, carers, children and young people to Shrewsbury, highlighting this problem. It can take up to 12 months to have an appointment. The children and young people are suffering as a consequence. Why is there not a plan of action to address this important piece of work that's needed within this report? This is a priority for them, for their health and well-being, as South Staffordshire and Shropshire NHS Foundation delivers the service for them. And I know from experience how long it can take for children and young adolescents to get an assessment on their condition. So I ask you that it be put into the report. Thank you.
Councillor Ian Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer members to item paragraph 4.2.23, where the report proudly boasts how they've increased to 13 the parish environmental teams in the borough, which covers 85% of the borough's population. I'm aware of these teams because we have one in my parish, and I'm very pleased with the work that it does and the fact that we also have apprentices within those teams that are trained for future life and work. What concerns me is that I understand that the administration's potential new contract for maintenance, housing, refuge, etc. services does not include parish environmental teams, which I feel is a severe loss. Could I ask the Cabinet member whether she will be making sure that we do have these teams in the future? And the other bit was, I noticed how proud she was about the educational attainments. She can't read the report regarding secondary education. In page P30 of the appendix, it says the percent of children in good or outstanding schools. For secondary, it is only 66%. And for the percentage of schools judged to be less than good through lack of timely intervention, secondary, it's only 60%. Is it really, can you be so proud of those figures, or would it perhaps be that the appropriate Cabinet member for education and children should consider their position? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Councillor Bill Tomlinson.
I hadn't really intended to talk on this paper, Mr. Speaker, so I'll keep it brief. We've had an impassioned debate earlier about protecting children in our borough. And obviously, to protect those children as best we can, we need to use our resources as best we can, but we also need the resources in the first place. Secondly, it's absolutely important that we protect those vulnerable adults under our care, and we have been doing. And I'm sure Councillor Reid has agreed in the past that we should invest further monies into both adult and children's care. But obviously that money has got to come from somewhere. Now, the title of this is apt for me: Driving Delivery of the Council's Priorities. Driving normally includes a vehicle. Now, our vehicle's having petrol taken out of its bloody tank. Sorry, I swore. It is, on a huge scale. We have made £110 million worth of cuts to this authority so far. So far. And on top of that, we have not only had to make those cuts, we've added to both adult and children's social care. So that means more than 110 million has had to come out of the rest of this authority. We've heard today, also on the news in London, people utterly outraged at the increase in crime that's going on there in terms of knife crime amongst youngsters. And one gentleman come out and said, I am sick of this. I am sick of it going on and young and innocent people being dragged in. And he said it's likened to what it is in child sexual exploitation, in that it's drug exploitation in London, drug gangs, turf wars, fighting. What also have we got? A lot of people are saying a lot of the government inquiries that were published were fine, except what happened? They had the fundings cut for half the things that they were intending to do. The police numbers have been cut. We can't deliver on improvements to people and go on improving both for children and adults if we don't get sufficient resources to do that job with. I just hope that those on the other side here will be as impassioned as they have been tonight in lobbying their MPs to get more money, not just for here, but everywhere else. Thank you.
I think you'll find that the CAMS finance comes from the CCGs.
Is that a point of order?
Yes, that is why, Speaker, that it's South Staffordshire and Shropshire NHS Trust delivers that programme. They deliver the consultant, and they are at the moment one only. They are trying to get another one, and they hope to get one, but we have got nothing in this report to say what action we're doing because of the inadequacies in our support
I'm sorry,
for our
Councillor
children.
Fletcher, you've had one go at the bite of the cherry, and that is not really a point of order. Councillor Paul Watling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suggest, Councillor Fletcher, you speak to your colleague, Councillor Jackie Seymour, who sits on the Health and Wellbeing Board, because we had a clear presentation from Staffordshire Trust to say exactly how they're dealing with this issue. So we are clear on it. It is in our plan. It is in our plan. It's not written in detail in this plan, but it is in our plan of how we are working with commissioners to ensure that that those processes are improved. And for Councillor Ian Fletcher, I'd remind him of the percentage figures that there were at the end of the last Tory administration in terms of children in good or outstanding schools. And he should look back at that and remind himself that when he left when his administration left this council, the primary schools in this council were nowhere near the quality they are now. Thank you.
Councillor Lee Carter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to pick up the point about parish environmental teams from Councillor Fletcher. I'm actually pleased that he values his in his ward. Many other councillors across this chamber value theirs in their ward. What is going on at the moment, we are currently discussing and in the process of negotiation the new contract. There is flexibility in that contract. The new contract will be designed to be flexible, and we have got an officer going out to parishes across the borough to understand how that will impact them, how this new flexibility will benefit them, and how we can maintain that local resource as we go forward. What I would say is a lot of parish environmental teams have been funded through the Partnership Fund, and it is your party on the last 2 occasions that you've presented an alternative budget that didn't even acknowledge that Partnership Fund. So there's a question as to whether those pet teams would have existed or not.
Any further points on the report? No, Councillor Wright. Quickly, because it's kick-off time.
I'm just wondering how necessary to the council's performance this plan is, because everything I've heard tonight, reading through this, we aren't achieving anything.
Well, I'll let Councillor Ray Evans answer that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, can we operate without approving this plan?
Without approving the plan?
Well, yeah. Can we operate without approving it?
She can answer that question if that's your question on the thing. So can you resume your seat?
Go on.
Resume your seat. I did ask for questions on the report itself. What you're asking is about council business and council conduct itself.
Well, I did indicate, Charles, but you...
I did ask you, and I believe
you didn't ask me personally, did you? I indicated and you ignored it.
No, I didn't ignore you, Councillor Bentley. That's why you're on your feet now. So if you want Councillor Ray Evans to answer the points to the debate, can you resume your seat?
Yeah, okay.
Are there any further questions on the report itself? No? Councillor Ray Evans, please. To answer all the points that have been made.
I didn't actually understand the question. Or indeed hear it clearly, to be fair to Steve.
I'll do it in English for you.
Thank you.
Can we operate without this plan? Is it essential for the council moving forward? Because
Steve,
there's an awful lot in here that needs to be brought done.
Steve, I understand now. Sorry, I didn't hear you properly. I
Councillor
wasn't
Bentley.
being funny. Please believe me. Steve, my experience of business, which is quite long now, my career in business, is that I've never worked in an effective organisation that didn't have a business plan. You will know, and everyone in here will know, that if you don't have a plan and you don't know where you're going, you won't know where you get there. It's a straightforward business concept. It would be one that I'd be very disappointed if we didn't have one. So the answer is yes. Good practice, best practice, and that's what we all strive for.
The recommendation...
I didn't understand the answer.
Well, maybe when we move to the recommendation to vote on it, you may understand. On P1 of the report, it does say the recommendations that the council plan is approved. On the agenda, but on the report it says the council plan is approved, and just a moment, will you? I'm reading the report on A, and he says the council plan is approved, and the in-year performance against the council price is considered and noted. So the recommendation is approved, and also you note the second part. Oh, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please show. Any against? Any abstentions? I think it's clearly carried. Thank you. Right. I'm glad we resorted to a proper meeting. Right, we now come to notice of motion. And as Councillor Sean Davis is off sick, it's been notified to me that Councillor Overton will move the motion at 4-1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we know, since this motion was put forward, things have progressed an awful lot. £312 million has been allocated to the county for the reconfiguration of hospital services, which is bittersweet, really. Sweet as any investment into our beloved NHS is welcome. Maybe it's the end of austerity by this Tory government. Unfortunately, the bitter part is that we may see the loss of our consultant-led maternity unit, our inpatient paediatrics and our emergency centre. because the preferred option in the consultation will be option 1. We will make sure that Telford's voice is heard loud and clear. We will work hard with our residents to make sure option 2 is a preferred option in this, because that is the only way we will not see a reduction in services at the Princess Royal Hospital. Because it's moved on, we will withdraw the motion. Thank you.
Does the seconder agree to withdraw? I do. The motion is withdrawn. There's no vote on it. If you want to send yourself a note, Councillor Dugmore, do so. We now move to the second motion, moved by Councillor Eade. And I understand there may be an amendment.
Well, Speaker, we first requested an urgent debate on proposals for a third option to be included in the up-and-coming Future Fit consultation nearly 3 months ago. This was following a first-hand visit to Cramlington by myself, Councillor Dugmore, Mark Pritchard MP and Mr David Sambach, the former CEO of the Princess Royal Hospital. It is this Council's discredit that it did not consider our proposals as urgent back in January this year. Neither did this Labour administration make any attempt to discuss with us our thoughts on replicating the groundbreaking state-of-the-art hospital configuration as introduced in Northumbria. You didn't even get off your backsides to go and visit the facilities firsthand or take up clinicians' offer to visit the council to explain what they had achieved at Cramlington. All this council seems to have done with regard to the hospital debate is a lot of foot stamping, sulking, and threats which have only succeeded in destroying working relationships with the NHS. This is no way to influence outcomes and is to the utter detriment of this authority. At the opportunity provided by our members of Parliament to meet with the Health Secretary firsthand, the leader of this council, and I note he's not here, but I say if he was, sat there and said virtually nothing at all. Much to our astonishment after all the hype that was used in leading up to that meeting. Speaker, a state-of-the-art new emergency care centre could have been provided in between Telford and Shrewsbury, which would have been reached in the same time from many parts of Telford as the PRH is at the moment. It could also have been provided at 2/3 of the cost. The configuration in Northumbria is rated as outstanding, a rating never achieved by our hospitals here in Shropshire, and one which enjoys first-class outcomes and 24/7 consultant cover. Even so, the Council's arguments have been flawed, as they have only concentrated on A&E services and taken no account of the larger issue of planned care, which will actually affect more people in the borough. However, this too would not have been an issue if our proposals had even received a cursory glance, as recovery could have taken place in both Telford and Shrewsbury hospitals, plus the 4 community hospitals around the county. So let me be very clear that Future Fit never considered a business case for our proposals, despite what was said as a reason for turning down our request. They never did at all. There was no work on this. There was no evidence ever produced by Future Fit. So now, and despite the council leader's hollow and rather ineffective promise to defend the PRH, no matter what, the Future Fit consultation will go ahead, following record investment from this Conservative government. And I join Councillor Overton in welcoming that as well. Now, as I believe that the current level of consultant cover is dangerously low in Shropshire, we need to invest in our services as quickly and as effectively as possible. Speaker, I am so disappointed that for the sake of political dogma rather than cooperation, this Council's Labour administration has sold our community short. However, as Future Fit has publicly stated that they will consider alternative submissions during the consultation process, we will go it alone without you. But, as I said, you have really let our community down. And if a change of heart and direction was ever needed in this administration, it is certainly right at this moment. So, Speaker, reluctantly, as the consultation is now set to go ahead, I withdraw the motion.
Is the seconder agree to withdraw? The motion is withdrawn. No need for your amendment. That concludes the meeting.
Well done, Mr. Speaker.
Thank God for that.